Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mary Christensen, the Director of Product Marketing here at Billing Platform, and I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. Before we start, I want to let you know that we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions along the way, please enter them where you see the question mark on your screen. Now on to today's topic, subscription model innovation, 8 ways to monetize your products at scale that you may not have thought possible. Today's call is going to dig into 8 billing models that can be the difference from stagnating your growth to modernizing your approach to monetization and moving your business forward. To walk us through these business models is Brian Dingman, the Vice President of Solution Engineering at Billing Platform. To prove he has a bit of experience with this topic, Brian has over 15 years of experience selling, architecting, and delivering cloud-based technologies, specifically around the quote-to-cash process. And prior to joining Billing Platform, he held solution engineering roles at Aptus and Salesforce and is 3-time Salesforce certified. Thanks for being with us today, Brian. Now over to you.
Thanks, Mary. In terms of, this session overall today, it's more of an educational session in terms of kind of what I've seen. It's more educational in the sense that hopefully you leave this knowing a little bit more about revenue models than kind of talking specifically about Billing Platform. In terms of, revenue models, I'm not here to proclaim that, one-time charges and perpetual licenses and, they're gone or dying. But we're definitely seeing a shift towards recurring revenue. Whether it's more predictable revenue for the seller or the ability to pay for what you use. For the buyer, the benefits are tangible on both sides, and you can definitely go and look at these analysts to find out more information. I'm not an expert in this space, but in terms of what they're saying, and they have some really good some research out there that you can look into. But bottom line is things are changing, and changing for the better, I do believe. In terms of kind of focus for this discussion is talking through some modern billing models, and there's 8 here that we're going to go through today, and we're going to talk through each one of them. And then we're also going to talk about 8 kind of customer stories that go along with those. Most people are really familiar with subscriptions, but subscription is not the only notion out there. One of the biggest pitfalls I kind of see in my role is customers who have selected a subscription management platform. And then their business changes or they acquire a company and they've lost their agility because that subscription management platform really only handles subscriptions. So I'll kind of talk about some of these pitfalls too as we go through the slides. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that these all come together too. It's not like one subscription model. Dynamic pricing. You can have subscriptions with consumption. You can have hybrid and dynamic pricing. You can have all of these different types together at the same time. It's just more about, hey, this is what's out there. This is what's available. These are what we're seeing in the market, and it's what folks should be aware of as they're making a kind of discussion or decision with regards to billing and billing systems, finance, just conversations in terms of kind of longer term, instead of looking at kind of focusing on the here and now, which is another pitfall I see all the time. Is somebody wants to launch a new product, I'll call it, and they focus on what's going on today and how a solution can solve that problem. They don't look more holistically, more longer term. We'll start with subscriptions. Obviously, everybody is the most familiar with this. According to Deloitte, the average consumer household has 9 subscriptions. Seems like a lot, but if you kind of peel it back, it actually makes sense. I started my career, it was kind of things like newspapers, cable subscriptions. Now you have Netflix, and my car has a subscription. To use certain features, I got to subscribe to it. So we're seeing a huge proliferation of it. As a consumer, we're familiar with it, right? You have Apple Music, you get a free month, or a free week, or whatever that free period is. On the consumer side, it's upfront. So that, they get you in this hopes of, hey, this person's going to try it and they're going to continue to go through with this solution. Now we do see some of that in the business world as well. But we're starting to see more creative uses of kind of this freemium model. And I mentioned freemium because that's probably the kind of the biggest thing I think with subscriptions is it's really turning into this consumerization of the enterprise. And I'm not the first one to coin that term, and I don't claim responsibility for it, but that's, we're starting to see that come over into B2B. So subscriptions have always been in B2C. As we look into B2B, we're starting to see this same thing, and that freemium model is a really good one. Gets people hooked on it early, and then they continue to subscribe. But things are a little bit different too. Like I've talked to multiple businesses where instead of giving that free month or that first 3 months free, they're looking to do that, in months 13, 14, and 15. And that's a little bit challenging from a revenue recognition perspective, from a contract perspective. Now your terms become 15 months, and so keep that in mind. Is that as you look at subscription, what was super simple and easy is becoming a lot more challenging, especially in the enterprise. They're doing things a little bit differently. In terms of kind of customers, using subscriptions. The one I'm going to talk about today is a really unique one. They had a really simple monthly subscription solution. The solution was really popular. People were using it for consumer, and then they started bringing it into their work and using it for work. And what happens is, they start using it for work, and they go to their managers and they say, "Hey, I would like to expense this." And one user led to another user, and then all of a sudden you might have a company like Google that has 2,000 individual licenses of this product at full price, and it could be across multiple divisions, multiple business units, different departments. And I guess you can just imagine what's going to happen is that this large enterprise company is going to come back to this software vendor and say, "Hey, look, we need a discount on this. We're not, we have 2,500 active licenses. We're paying full price on this." And so, what became that easy subscription model is now, okay, well, we have to, do contractual pricing, and, certain divisions are going to have a certain price because the company is going to pay for it. And other divisions, they'll have to pay for it maybe a little bit of a discount because they have a wholesale. And so they end up having to model this account hierarchy. So whether it's line of business, divisions, number of users, etc., and then looking at that from a contractual standpoint and giving that volume-based discount across the whole organization. It might span regions, countries, etc. That's all of a sudden it's not that simple subscription anymore. It's a lot more complex. And this customer, they had started out on a basic subscription management solution. This subscription management solution had no concept of an account hierarchy, and so that's when they started looking at additional solutions to really take more of this B2B business. But I kind of just mentioned this once again. It's kind of things that I've seen, pitfalls that I've seen, right? There's a number of solutions out there that, like I said, don't have account hierarchies. There's other subscription management solutions that don't have the concept of a one-time charge even. And so they end up having to do, all these kind of machinations just to simulate a one-time purchase. And so, like I said, once again, this is just really more educational and informative. In this case, it's just more about, hey, look longer term, think, bigger picture. What happens if something changes? Acquisition, and so that's kind of the general theme for this is think a little bit beyond kind of your day to day, and think beyond what's going on in terms of subscriptions, and maybe as we move into kind of other models like consumption, for example, these can become combined with subscriptions. And so, what's a consumption billing model? Just simply, it's charging a customer based on how much of something they use. The consumed good is called usage, and it's usually priced, or in kind of industry terms, that's called rating, by volume or tiers. So an example everyone's familiar with is your water bill. You pay usually per thousands of gallons used for that. Another real simple one can be your electric bill. You pay per kilowatt hour. You don't have to have exclusive consumption only billing models, right? These can be mixed with subscriptions. They can be combined. But from an illustrative kind of position, those are the most kind of common ones to explain it. And generally speaking, they're usually part of other models. And as I hop into the customer story here, we'll see just that. So this customer was they're a leader in the insurance and automotive industries, and they do a bunch of different things. So they have subscriptions, they have one-time charges, but what's most unique about them is they had a large volume of usage. And so these were related to insurance claims essentially. And so, in their case, they had 30 million plus usage records that also needed to be taxed. So if you think about 30 million of anything, it's a lot of data, right? So we're talking terabytes of data. And what the problem here was, it would just take a long period of time to close out the invoicing period or the billing period or the period close. Essentially, it would take weeks. And just taxing 30 million of anything takes a long time. So this was a very manual process, and looking at solutions to automate usage, automate consumption, pricing, you need two things. The first one is mediation. So mediation is the process of loading that consumption data, and then you need rating of that and taxation of it. So those are kind of combined and together. So loading the usage into the billing system and then being able to rate it as pricing, rating, and then tax it. And so the reason, I guess in terms of kind of the takeaway from this is, almost all of the subscription management platforms out there do not include mediation. And so it's just something to think about. If you ever decide to move to consumption pricing models, it's going to require third-party tools. And the problem with that is then you start taking core billing out of billing and putting it into, say, an ETL layer, for example. And now you have billing in kind of two different places in terms of logic. So it's just something to keep in mind. In terms of dynamic pricing, I always kind of refer to this one as the holy grail of pricing models, and maybe the holy grail for businesses, not so much consumers. But when you talk about dynamic pricing or true dynamic pricing, think of your Uber surge pricing. That's a real common one. Something else that's that's kind of an example of it is, you say you're going into a parking garage and you want to charge for the parking spot based on how full the garage is. So if it's empty, you want to have a lower price to attract more people, and then it's basically supply and demand, essentially pricing. As the parking garage fills up, you charge more and more until you reach the threshold. That's dynamic pricing at its core. The problem with dynamic pricing is, all these companies have these great ideas of how to do it, but it usually requires like custom billing solutions to do it. And that's kind of been the hurdle. And then, it gets into, well, is billing a core differentiator for us? And the answer to that is almost universally no. Most customers, their core differentiation is their product that they're serving. So in that, if you think of a software company, right, how they build their software and how they issue their invoice isn't a competitive differentiator. It's the software they provide. And so, dynamic pricing is kind of one of those ones that you always try and reach for, but you can't ever really get there unless you build your own solution. And so in the case of, this customer, they do moves essentially for service members. They do them for, households, et cetera. If you think about how a move is priced, it's unique, right? It's basically based on the distance. And so that distance, there's going to be also kind of fluctuations depending on, if you're going to a metro area, it might be more expensive than a rural area, but it's always going to be based on the distance. And then it's going to be based on the weight. And then it's going to be based on capacity. It's going to be based on, seasonality. All of these charges come in, all of these factors come into basically pricing. And oh, by the way, the weight is estimated at the beginning. And then, there's a final weight. So once the truck runs over the scales, it actually comes up with a final price. And so once again, this customer was doing this all internally. They had an IT solution that they had built, and it basically had run end of life, end of support for some of the components. And so, that's always the pitfall of building your own solution. At some point, it's going to come end of life. It's going to be end of support. The other thing that always comes up is PCI compliance. Nobody wants to be in the business of doing PCI compliance if their business is moving, or let's say they operate a parking garage, for example. You don't want to have to worry about PCI compliance. You don't want to have to worry about other compliances that might come along the way, like GDPR, for example, or what have you. And so that's kind of where I go back to this. What's your core differentiator? And at the end of the day, just maybe leave here knowing that these kind of dynamic pricing models can be handled out of the box. There are solutions on the market now that can do these. Doesn't require a homegrown billing solution anymore. In terms of hybrid pricing, it's just simply the ability to charge for physical and digital goods and services. Usually involves one-time charges, subscriptions, usage charges. Let's say you're buying, and I use an example like, a pivot irrigation system, something that's really common. Everybody's buying this these days. You could buy or you could lease that equipment. In the case, and I'll talk a little bit about buying and leasing in a second, but then you have, the software subscription that goes along with it, right? Because everything in agriculture now, whether it's a tractor or combine or what have you, it requires, GPS access, and it can run on its own, to be honest. And all of that is done through software. So, what used to be a one-time hardware purchase now requires software to operate, kind of like your car, right? We're getting into that with your car. We're starting to see it, not completely, but as much as the agricultural industry, but we're starting to see it more and more. And then, you have an annual maintenance contract on top of there. And so, just kind of talking about that type of pricing, it's really varied. And it can, require different kind of, accounting requirements. And I mentioned lease versus subscription. And this is something, you see it with, the next customer I'm going to talk about, right? They're basically providing a phone service. So, kind of universal communication as a service. As part of that service, you can buy a phone, or you can subscribe, make it part of your package. So you're I'll call it, subscribing to it. It's not leased, right? That's a big differentiator, because leasing goes through lease accounting, whereas, when you're subscribing to a phone, it's just part of your plan. And so there's ASC 606 implications versus, the lease accounting implications. But that's if you think about that kind of telco solution, right? You got the phone, you got maybe headsets, and then you have the actual service itself that gives you, phone connectivity. Then that phone connectivity can then also be pooled, for example. So you might have 1,000 minutes for each user included to Canada, per month. Then you can pool all those minutes across all your user base to give you that, that, I guess, flexibility, so that if you have a high demand user who's using maybe 2,000 or 3,000, and then you have another user who's low demand in Canada calling, then, it kind of evens out the revenue. So it's an example of, subscription with included overage, or with included amounts plus, overage on top of that. But the overage is calculated at a pooled level. So a number of different kind of concepts going on in there between, like I said, between subscriptions, usage, and then kind of pooling as well. At the end of the day, it's like I said, it's something like I mentioned earlier. Some solutions can't do one-time charges, so it's something, as you look at kind of what you're selling. You always want to focus on kind of maybe now, future, and then, like I said, around the leasing versus subscription model. It's also another big component you want to take a look at. What's best for your business? I think if those are kind of key takeaways from this one, that's what I would suggest. In terms of the next kind of pricing construct, and I use that as more of a construct than a billing model, is consolidated invoicing. And consolidated invoicing is primarily used for customers who have the concept of an account hierarchy. So an account hierarchy is essentially utilized to relate parent accounts with subsidiaries or departments or divisions, in this case for billing purposes. It allows you to roll up charges to a parent account or invoice directly at the sub-account level while allowing for contractual rates to flow down. One of the primary uses for this type of modeling is to send a single summarized invoice to a parent company with charges grouped for each sub-account. So that's the most common use case. Is that that kind of rolled up invoice. I'll talk a little bit about this customer in the sense that they're a franchise, and all franchises are alike, which is pretty neat in terms of kind of the typical charging models. If you think about what they're selling, right? They're not actually selling anything to their franchisees. They're basically giving them services, so technology services, marketing services, training, things like that. And so that's, and then obviously you have your franchise agreement as well that you're billing for. The interesting thing about that is there's some intricacies there, but this specific company, they had at the time they had 3 brands and 5,000 locations, and so now they're up to 7 brands and I don't know how many locations, but so automation was key for them to expand their business. But when we first started working with them, they had in this space they have what's called a franchise relationship management. It's basically a CRM for franchises. It was a very flat model. So if you own, let's say 11 franchises or 12 franchises, you would get 12 invoices. You'd get and then on the converse side, the company might get one payment for all 12 franchises, and then they'd have to then go allocate all those payments. So lots of manual stuff going on. No kind of economies of scale for either the business or the franchisee, and leading to kind of problems with closing the books and etc. The other thing they wanted to do was that that person who owns 11 or 12 franchises, they're more important to the company than, say, the person who owns one. And the reason for that is it's much easier for them to acquire a 13th franchise or a 14th franchise and scale, because they already have all the infrastructure in place. They're running 12 other 13 other franchises, and so it's easier for them to acquire more. Whereas the person who has one, the startup costs are very significant for them, number one, and number two, just kind of if you're doing 1 versus 13, it takes a lot more. Kind of getting back to this, problem where they had with the billing, they wanted to kind of create that account hierarchy. And I'll just mention this here because this is one of the biggest areas where the ERPs fall apart. And that's what they were doing this out of Great Plains. And, that's kind of between the franchise management system and Great Plains. This is where things kind of just deteriorated, ending up having to do all of these calculations monthly. But they also wanted to launch a new service, or basically incentivize their franchise owners who had that many franchises. They wanted to give them reduced rates. So if you think about it, if you own 12 or 13 franchises, your marketing spend is going to be much less than the person who owns one, right? Because you're probably operating them all in one location, and you can kind of combine your spend. Same with your tech fees. If you're operating 12 or 13 of them, you don't need to pay as much as the person who's operating one. So they wanted to give that person not only a one bill experience, but they wanted to be able to offer some of these fees with a tiered discount on it. So the more franchises you had, the cheaper it got. And so that was really kind of the impetus, and then obviously the automation of all of this together. But the key kind of takeaway is this is really kind of the breakaway, I think, that I've seen the most is from ERP or your general ledger. The ones that are out there on the market is this account hierarchy structure. Almost all of them struggle with this concept, and so it's something to keep aware of as you look kind of at your business. That account structure, once you start dealing with complex account hierarchies, it's probably time to start looking at maybe third-party solutions for your billing. Kind of moving on to revenue commitments. So revenue commitments, really, it's the ability to allow customers to pay a flat rate for a set amount of services. So a customer would get a discounted rate, and businesses get predictable revenue. That's really the kind of win-win. So for both sides. I will say, the most common one here is a minimum commitment. So you agree to pay, $20,000 a month for these 5 services, or a quantity of this service. That's kind of the most common one. I will say that there are some pitfalls here that you'll be aware of. You should be aware of, excuse me. And the first one is going to be, let's say your usage changes, and I think COVID's a perfect example of that. We saw, companies, shutter their doors and employees go home. So if your business, all of a sudden the usage plummets, then your usage of these services plummet, then it's something you want to have an easy out of, or at least a manageable out of the contract. And then B, look at a company like DoorDash, or maybe even Instacart, right? On the opposite side, their usage of AWS probably skyrocketed during that time frame. And so they probably burst through any kind of commitments that they might have had. And so you always want to have that option as well. So you want to have, the ability to burst into a higher package, and not just, be stuck with all that overage, or be stuck in some kind of plan where you're paying outright overage for it. So when we talk about revenue commitments, those are things to think about. In terms of the customer here, this was a cloud software provider. They were looking to offer kind of a new usage model of their platform. Essentially what it was an annual commitment. So if you say committed to 120,000 credits over the year, that's kind of like their annual commitment. So you'd agree to use 120,000 of this service. It's some kind of cloud service, and then you get a discounted rate. Obviously, that's the win for the customer. Now, one of the pitfalls of kind of this prepaid kind of usage model, I'll call it, is you can't recognize revenue for that usage until it's consumed. So if you take in the 120,000 purchase for those services, whatever dollar amount that might be, you can't recognize it until it's actually consumed. So what they did was they also did a monthly minimum commitment. So if you take that 120,000, they divided it by 12. So every month had 10,000 as the minimum. And then as each month progressed, they would say, okay, your minimum is 10,000 for this month. So if a customer only used 8,000, they were still going to recognize for 10,000. And it gives them, it prevented that whole kind of lumpy recognition of all that revenue at the end of the year, and it allowed them to do it kind of as they go. So it was kind of an interesting scenario, but it's ends up being a little bit. I think it's in this case a little bit more advantageous for the business versus the consumer, but both folks knew of the predictability of it, but in this case it gave them extremely predictable revenue in terms of every month. They knew how much was going to be be able to be recognized as revenue. In terms of kind of the next arrangement, I'll call it partner arrangements, next kind of pricing construct. This one encompasses quite a bit. So partner arrangements really refer to how a customer goes to market. The typical arrangements are partners, resellers, distributors, and then there's another concept called marketplace, which I'll go into more detail on the customer story. But when you sell through a channel, the channel partner can invoice the customer directly, or they can ask a company to bill on their behalf. In this bill on behalf model, the partner typically pays the company a percentage fee for their service, and the end customers pay an uplifted rate. Something else we often see in these relationships is a commission model. This is a percentage fee that is usually noted in a statement or account payable journal entry. And so I think that's kind of something to just call out, because I've had a number of conversations with customers who do this kind of channel sale, and they do pay commissions, and they've almost exclusively done it in an Excel model. And we've been talking to them about the billing, because the billing for bill on behalf and kind of this reseller distributor model is a little bit challenging in terms of kind of the different parties and where the fees are going, and being able to know, let's say you're charging that fee to bill their end customers, you might be charging a percentage of revenue for that fee, for that billing fee, for example. You have to know all the charges on the child account and then kind of roll them up at the parent level. So it can get somewhat complex. But the other thing is, like I mentioned, is commissions, right? Commissions are payables; they're not receivables, and so that's something that they were doing in spreadsheets and kind of outside the billing solution, and then loading it into the GL. And so that's something we've helped companies automate as well as part of this process. So just kind of keeping that in mind. I'll talk a little bit about the marketplace example here. This was a digital advertising, or I keep saying is a digital advertising company, and they had basically a marketplace. So they had a platform that would bring a buyer and seller together. So if you imagine you owned a website and you had a piece of real estate on that website that you wanted to run advertisements on, and so this company had a marketplace that would bring a buyer and seller together for those types of marketplace transactions. So very similar to eBay, and like eBay, you could be a buyer and a seller at the same time. And so at the end of the invoicing period and end of the billing period, they would have to then net out the charges. So the company, it could be a positive, meaning they actually need to be paid because they've sold all of this real estate. They've had all these people buy their placement on there, and that we might have to issue them an actual dollar amount of funds to compensate them for that, minus the fees. Obviously, they had to pay to be part of the service. But it could also be AR, in the sense that they actually owed the company money. So netting was a big component here. But once again, it goes back to this whole AR and AP kind of example, and being able to solve for some of these, I'll call them complex AP solutions. So net of it is there's a number of different ways to go to market. Excel isn't the way to do it. So keep that in mind in terms of commissions and netting, and being able to do some of these more advanced kind of charging models. It's totally something that can be automated. In terms of prepaid credits, are simply the ability to hold a prepaid balance for services on a customer's account. The most common example, I think, is a gift card. To be honest, it's probably the easiest way to think about it. You buy a gift card at Costco or Sam's Club, and say it's a $50 gift card, or $50 worth of say Starbucks, and you're paying a reduced rate for it, so you pay $45 for it, and then you load it onto your Starbucks account, and essentially you have a $50 credit balance that you can use for any of the services or any of the goods and services they sell there. That's a real simple example. What's unique though is that it's the dollar amount, and so it's like, as I kind of move into this customer story, keep that in mind. So this customer, they were starting a new ride sharing business, and they needed to they were launching it from scratch, and it was all electric fleet. And so they needed to, get awareness out there. And so part of that was, promotions and marketing and other kind of, promotional activities. And so, one of the promotions was if you download the app and you sign up, you'd get, €20 worth of service. Or if you referred a friend, you might get another €5. And so the goal was just to keep the word spreading. And the way they handled this was basically through, we call it a voucher, but essentially it was a prepaid credit. So that $20 credit that you'd get for signing up, it had a duration. You had to use the service in a certain period of time. So say 3 months, for example, and you would utilize against that for your first couple rides. Let's say you did the refer a friend one as well, and so you could have multiple stacked credits on there. Each credit could have its own duration. Each can basically there had to be some intelligence of like which one to use first. So in terms of like a FIFO method, for example. So that's a real kind of simple example of kind of how this works. What we've seen actually though, and this is kind of where it gets into a little bit more abstract, is this concept of credits as a currency. So I've talked to a number of cloud infrastructure providers where they don't actually price their services in a currency, they price them in credits. And so this is just kind of, just more of an extension of what's out there, right? And what people are thinking about. So being able to, buy 300 credits that you can utilize for any service that they may offer. And so seen it a number of times. Like I said, I've been seeing it a lot more in cloud services, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this kind of jump over into some other markets. There's some interesting benefits for both the buyer and the seller in that kind of arrangement. So that's going to bring us to the end of the presentation today. We're going to open it up for some Q&A. But thanks again for the time, and hopefully you took away a couple things that you can take back to your business, and potentially think about doing something new. So that's going to bring us to the end of the presentation today. We're going to open it up for some Q&A. But thanks again for the time, and hopefully you took away a couple things that you can take back to your business and potentially think about doing something new. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. That was a lot of really good information and good ideas for different ways to monetize products and services. So thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in learning how to solve your complex monetization challenges, please contact us for a free consulting session at contact@billingplatform.com. Thanks again, and we hope to see you in a future session.